Hi, my name is Peter Hernandez. I'm a current junior here at the Honors College, and today we're going to discuss utopias. So, for the last semester, I have been studying utopias in length, and one of the topics that I really want to discuss is the fact that utopias have a lack of knowledge in them. And a little background story would be that a utopia is a common society where it's ideal to live and everyone's just having a good time. A dystopia, on the other hand, is completely different. People don't want to live there, and it's very negative compared to the utopia, even though some utopias are negative in nature. So, a little background story to that as well is one of the stories that we discussed in class was the story of Genesis, or the book of Genesis. And in that book, it discussed Adam and Eve and how Adam and Eve were told not to eat from a particular tree. And one day Eve encounters a snake that convinces her to take a bite out of that tree. At the time, Eve nor Adam knew what would happen or what would be the consequences of them taking that bite, but they went for it anyways. They were curious, and I think that's not a problem, but at the time it was, because since they were not knowledgeable of the fact that they would be damned or they would get in trouble for doing such an action, they decided to proceed with it anyways. And that's what I mean when I say lack of knowledge. I feel like had Eve known, for example, that she would have been damned with having to bear childbirth, or mankind losing life eternal, they probably would have never taken that bite from the tree, and we would have continued to see a perfect utopia or dystopia. It depends on how you look at it. But because they were not initially told of the fact that this would become an issue, I think that really makes things kind of messed up, because how do you expect someone to act accordingly if they don't know what they're doing? I think that throughout all the other readings, there is a similar belief. There's a similar idea of the more that the government knows, the more that other people know, and the less that the citizens know, the better. I think that's where the issues start coming into play, because then we start seeing consequences, we start seeing penalties, we start seeing different things like that. And that's not really a great way of running a society, yet that's how that story played out. Another story that I thought that was interesting was the 5 ages. The 5 ages were the Gold Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, and the Age of Heroes. In one of the stories, you'll see how Zeus is trying to make his own perfect utopia, and before that, how the Titans were overthrown by the gods, and then Zeus comes into power and he tries to make his own utopia, but greed, and he sees that mankind is not the perfect image that he tried portraying it as, and then he has to abolish it. He has to start new every time, and then he does it again, and you start seeing him trip over the same rock in terms of him encountering all these obstacles in each age. So I think that one of the important lessons to learn from this is, once again, the knowledge aspect of it. I think that people weren't knowledgeable of the fact that Zeus had a certain image of them, and although what one person may think is right, another person may think is wrong, and yes, greed is considered something horrible and stuff like that. I think that if people were just more knowledgeable as to what not to do, rather than just giving them the tools and expecting them to survive on their own, I think that's really where it reaches a little shady area, and especially in the age in the 5 ages that we're discussing about. I think that the utopia aspect is that Zeus tried portraying this beautiful land, this beautiful piece that he made himself, and then he kept destructing it, and he starting from scratch. And that's not a really good mentality, because you can't always restart. You can't always press the restart button and expect a different result. Like Einstein said, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result, and that's exactly what he was doing. He kept making mankind. He kept doing all of that, and then it kept reaching him to the same point where he was at, which is to just restart it and do something differently. And that's something that definitely needs to be. So lastly, the story of Plato. I think that, or I'm sorry, the Republic of Plato. I think that the Republic of Plato, what I mostly got out of it was the fact that they had gender roles. So women had specific labor that they had to do, and so did men. But then we also saw the event of those classifications and different social statuses, and I think that that is where this dystopia really went wrong, because we still saw the factors of greed, we saw the factors of competitiveness, all of that play a huge role, and people were not very happy. Basically, in this one, it's a little more realistic than I think the other two. Not saying that the other two weren't true, but this one was a little more home-based because of the fact that we still see this in our world today, whether it be competitiveness or like the space race or different things like that. I think are like something that really hits home rather than like eating a fruit from a tree or like the Titans and the Roman gods and stuff like that. So I think that that's really something that needs to play a huge role in our discussion on Utopia. Okay, so after discussing those three stories, as we could see, knowledge plays a huge role in terms of how people are aware of what's happening with their surroundings. In most of these instances, whether it be the government or a higher power or being, there's a lack of knowledge between the two, or lack of communication, one would say. So like trying to play it back into our society today, yes, utopias in theory sound great, and everyone would want to live in a state of utopia. But I think that the issue that a utopia would have is when people start denying others of that right of knowing things. And I'm not saying that transparency has to be, there has to be total transparency, like there can't be any like secrets. I think that some things, maybe like military things and stuff like that, it's important. But now when it comes to like basic knowledge, and when it comes to how things are running and how things are and how like a person operates and just stuff like that, that someone would want to know and has the right to know, I think that that's where utopia really fails, because I don't think that the message is being portrayed correctly when things are done with through backdoor channeling and through secrets like that. One of the biggest things that, in my experience, I feel like a utopia could really improve on, besides the whole knowledge thing, is really catering it to the people. I think that from the get-go, it starts brainwashing. So you start brainwashing people to think the same. You start brainwashing people to act the same. You start categorizing people. You start telling them, this is what your job's going to be. This is how you're going to do it. This is going to be your number, not your name. This is going to be your number. I think that those are really huge issues, because then you lose a sense of individuality and you lose a sense of like being. And we're a pretty big world as it is. So like for utopia to really work, I think that that sense of being one and that sense of being not only united but being an individual is super, super important. One of the things that I would also like want to touch up on is the fact of the categories. Kind of like Plato's Republic, yes, the categories exist and they still exist today, but that doesn't mean that like we have to use that to define us. And it's important to keep in mind that yes, although there's categories and there's all of those things, you still can move through those categories. And I really have a hard time believing that our society will gear away from having social statuses. But I also have a hard time understanding how utopias could potentially benefit it as a whole, having those things, because it's going to reach a point where the bottom or the lower half is going to rebel and do something to the middle and top half so that they could go higher. So just to like conclude everything, I just wanted to let everyone know that although like perfect in theory and it sounds really good, utopias or dystopias for this matter can actually be very dangerous, and like citizens need to be knowledgeable and that's like the similarity that they have, and that's what I was discussing about in my paper. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and best of luck.